So there's a lot of hand-wringing in the United States about how divided we are as a country right now, and it's definitely gotten pretty bad. There's no denying it, but I'm not sure that we're the most divided we've ever been. We did have a civil war after all. I also just recently watched the Vietnam War documentary series that Ken Burns produced on PBS, and it's awesome, by the way, highly recommended, but it really got to me just how divided we were back then. Like, things really felt like they were on the precipice of completely falling apart. I was a baby back then, so obviously I have no reference to it whatsoever. But I do think that the real divide in our country, and really around the world, is city versus country. I mean, this is true from the beginning of recorded history. You can look at writings from Roman philosophers and historians that talked about how city people saw the country agricultural side as these backwards folks, and then the country people saw the city people as opulent and corrupted and you know, Sodom and Gomorrah type stuff. In fact, when you look at how this country was founded, the arguments and the debates and the compromises that were made, it was all, you know, around this city-country divide, making sure that the rural, less populated areas got as much representation as the urban areas. And while the Civil War was definitely about slavery, there was also a major cultural divide, with the North being more industrialized and urban, and the South being more rural and agricultural. But when it comes to this cultural divide, I like to think that maybe I have a somewhat unique perspective, or at least an all-encompassing perspective, because as I've talked about before, I grew up in a really, really small town and then moved to the city, you know, when I got older, and so I've had both of those experiences. But just to reiterate the point, in case you don't know, the town that I grew up in had about 2,500 people living there. I graduated in a high school class of 48. But the funny thing is, I had cousins that grew up where my mother grew up, in a much smaller town. There were only 300 people in this town. They graduated in a class of 10. One of my cousins was in a class of 10, and that was the biggest graduating class they'd had in a long time. They called me a city boy. And when I was growing up, I never really felt like I fit in to this small town, and maybe I'm just not a small town person. That's definitely a possibility. I never felt like I fit in there. But I might not have felt like I fit in, but I also didn't, you know what I was missing. You don't know what you're missing when you never had it in the first place. Like most people in my town, I thought that the cities were dangerous and full of criminals and gangs and stuff like that. I thought people that lived in the cities were spoiled, that they were snobs. I felt like you kind of had to be rich to live in the city. And I grew up around that attitude, so, you know, I adopted it myself. I looked down my nose at city people. I felt like they couldn't survive without their malls and without their, you know, without their big restaurants. And I felt proud to be from a small town. I felt like we were a hardier stock. So anyway, I graduated high school, went to college in Denton, Texas, which is not a big city by any means, but they had a mall, which was huge for me. Like, I grew up in a town that didn't have a McDonald's. I grew up in a town that didn't have a movie theater. I grew up in a town that didn't have anything. Like, I mean, you had to drive an hour to Wichita Falls to do anything. So to be in Denton, where there was a mall right there, there were McDonald's and all kinds of other restaurants. I mean, just the overwhelming amount of choice every time I left my house to go do something was amazing to me. I'd never experienced that before. Now, my wife came from Austin, and Austin actually, when she grew up, was not at all the Austin that is today. It's grown by leaps and bounds, but even still, her going from Austin to Denton, you know, it was like she was going into like a backwater somewhere. Actually, backwater is too strong. She thought it was like tiny and quaint. But after I graduated, you know, I got a lot of pressure from my family to move back to my hometown, and I was like, for what? Like, what am I going to do there? I have a radio, TV, film degree. What am I going to do with that in my hometown? And that's a weird thing about small town families. I'm only going to say this because this is not a totally public video, but they do weirdly put pressure on you to maintain the cohesive family unit at the expense of your own dreams. Like, you're just expected to put everything that you want in life aside and live there in this, frankly, shithole because they're there and they want you to be there with them. It's a weird thing. I get a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about it. Or maybe it's just my family. Like, my aunt refuses to come into Dallas for any reason whatsoever. She tells this story. She tells a story about how one time she was driving in Dallas, got stuck in a traffic jam, or like she was on a busy road and got scared because she's not used to seeing other cars on the road, I guess. But anyway, she got so scared that she prayed to Jesus to get her out of this situation, and she promised that if she ever got out of that situation, she would never come to Dallas again. And then, you know, she did survive because it was a little traffic. It's not that big a deal. But, you know, she has, to this day, I mean, it's probably been 20 or 30 years. She has kept her promise to Jesus and has not come back to Dallas. That's my family. And that would be just a cute little story, except for the fact that she has a son that lives not in Dallas, but in a suburb of Dallas. And she's got grandkids that live out here, and she never comes to see them. I don't know what anybody else's religious beliefs are, but I'm pretty sure that Jesus did not have that in mind when she made that deal with him. I've been in this house for... It'll be 10 years next year that I've been in this house. And I've been visited by my parents. I could count the number of times they visited me here on one hand and still have a couple fingers left over. I'm always expected to go to them, always. And it's you know, it's a 2-hour drive to see my dad. It's like a 4 or 5 hour drive to see my mom. And I work. Both my parents are retired. They could travel all they want. In fact, they do travel a lot, but they don't come here because they just don't like being in Dallas. So me getting them to come see me is just, it's a non-starter. And it sucks. I feel very left out. I feel like I don't really feel like I have a family a lot of times. But anyway, getting back to the point, I lived the first half of my life, pretty much half, 18 years of my life in a small town. After that I moved and I've been living in the cities ever since. And my opinion of small towns has changed drastically. The main thing that gets me is when I go back to my hometown is they're food deserts. There's a term now that's called food deserts. There's nothing to eat there that's remotely healthy. Everyone in my family has health problems, and it's because the only food they have is utter crap. They got a Dairy Queen in my hometown. That's it. But there's just no options there. It's either chicken strips, or you got to drive an hour to Wichita Falls to get a salad. I get every once in a while, it's like, I don't know how you can live in Dallas. It's so dangerous there. But the first thing I see when I drive in to my hometown is this bank, or this bank building. And when I was growing up, there was a bank headquartered in my hometown, and it was pretty big. It was all over the place. It was, I don't know how many branches they had, but I would say in the dozens around the area. And it had our name on it. It was a source of pride. So you drive into town and you see this building that used to be the headquarters for this regional, powerful bank. And, you know, they closed down probably 20 years ago now. No, more than that. 25, maybe 30? But anyway, it's just this building that's sitting there, and it's falling apart, and there's like rust stains coming down from the windows. It looks like the building's crying. That's the first thing you see, is this abandoned, crying building. And the next thing you see as you drive through downtown are just shuttered stores. You know, stores that burned down and they never bothered to rebuild them, so you just have like the front and you can see the sky through the window kind of thing. There's empty lots with, you know, cars just falling apart in the middle of them. And I see it and I think, if I were in Dallas, this would be a ghetto. That's called blight. And when you're driving through Dallas, if you were to get to an area that looked like that, you would be locking your doors and rolling up your windows. It would not be a place you would want to be. They think it's safer in a small town. About 10 years ago, they actually found, I'm not joking, a serial killer living in my hometown. That was like big news. They found this guy. He had murdered like 3 or 4 people in Fort Worth, and then they found him teaching at a church in my hometown. That's the reason why a lot of people go to small towns, is to escape and disappear. And the crystal meth problem in a lot of small towns is just out of control, mine included. It actually got so bad, and there were so many break-ins and there were so many problems, that they had to enact a citywide curfew for everyone. You had to be in your homes after midnight. Children and adults. Curfew. I was actually at a wedding for one of my cousins, and my aunt was there. Different aunt from the Jesus and the Road aunt. But anyway, I was asking her about this curfew, and I was like, so is it for everybody or is it just for the kids? And she said, no, it's for everybody. And I said, so if you were out driving somewhere at 12:15, you could get pulled over. And I could see it in her face. She didn't want to say it, but she was kind of like, yeah, Yeah, I could get pulled over by the cops. So it's so bad in my hometown that grown-ass adults are willing to be treated like high schoolers so that they can feel safe. And they're telling me that the place I live in is dangerous? Literally, the house right across the street from my dad burned down, and it turned out that there was a meth lab in it. They always think that Dallas is so much scarier driving in Dallas than it is driving where they are. But whenever I drive back to my hometown now, I'm terrified. Because I'm used to driving in Dallas where I don't really even get on the highways that much. I mostly drive on residential streets or thoroughfares that are, 2 or 3 lanes, and there's a median, and then there are cars coming back this way. But when I drive to my hometown, it's a 2-lane highway, 75 miles an hour, and the cars coming at me are just, literally, a matter of feet away from me, just doing this 75 miles an hour, and it scares the crap out of me. And now, having lived in the small town and having lived in the city, I gotta say it, I find small town people to be incredibly fake. When you live in a small town, you see the same people day in and day out, over and over and over again. So people put on this face, they put on a front, and they're so nice and oh yeah and everything, and then as soon as you walk away, they're just talking shit about you. Everybody is one person outside their house and a totally different person inside their house. But I think, and I'm only speaking for the family that I have and the people I know that still live in my hometown, I think for them, it's very comforting and they feel safe knowing that they know everybody in the town. There is a very tight community feeling knowing that you know everybody. I remember I used to work at a grocery store in my hometown, and if somebody that we didn't know walked in, like if somebody was just driving through town and stopped at the grocery store to pick something up, like we would all kind of be like, who is this guy? When they're in a big city, they're just surrounded by strangers. It's just millions of people they don't know, and that's scary to them. And I understand that. I used to be the same way. But it also, I think, feeds a lot of tribalism and us versus them kind of thing. And I also, when I'm in, my hometown, I feel like I'm always being watched. When you're here in Dallas, you can walk around in public and like I said, most people don't know who you are, would never remember you or need to remember you. But in my hometown, you never live anything down. A lot of the people that I graduated high school with, I went to kindergarten with. And let me tell you, heaven forbid you make a mistake. It is stuck to you for the rest of your life. Like I said, I used to feel like small town folks were hardier than city folks, but now I go into small towns and I'm just like, why would you want to live here? Everything is so much harder here. Everything is more of a challenge here. Why would you make your life harder than it needs to be? But again, I remember when I was there, and I think small town people, they take pride in that. It's that cowboy mentality. They like the challenge. They like feeling individual, and it cultivates this we take care of our own, again, tribal mentality. And that's why they get so bent out of shape when people come in from other places and try to tell them what to do. And that's why you see a lot of these, and I'm not trying to make this political, but let's just say red states, more rural states tend to be more conservative because they don't like somebody coming in from the outside and saying, you need to do this. They want to just do it themselves, and they don't want help from anybody. Growing up, I had fewer educational opportunities. There were only so many classes that we could take. And this was before the internet. It might not be as bad now. I know you can take a lot of classes online now. When I got to college, I was behind everyone. I struggled really hard. I had to work twice as hard as everybody else just to keep up. And this is where I get really opinionated, but my general feeling, and again, just from my own personal experience, is that small town people tend to be a lot more fear-based. They tend to prefer the small town because they understand everything. They know that world. They know everybody there. They feel like it's like a warm blanket to them to know every day is going to be the same. You know who the good people are and you know who the bad people are. There's no ambiguity. There's not a lot of change to deal with. There's something very comforting about that to some people. And you get this cultural homogeneity, am I saying that word right? In the small towns, everybody thinks the same, everybody has the same beliefs and political opinions, religious opinions, and they definitely have a little bit of resistance to anybody coming in and bursting that bubble. I really feel like there's a very much a bubble effect in the small towns. You know, all you see on TV is the violence and corruption and horrors of the cities, whereas, you know, the small town people are all portrayed as, you know, good people that are all like the real Americans. They take that in, and it becomes a big part of who they are. Now, this is a very biased opinion. I'm being very biased here. I'm definitely giving this from the perspective of somebody who is now clearly a city person. And if I had done this 25 years ago and talked about this, I'm sure I would have had a vastly different opinion. Although I would also argue that it would be less informed because I'd never lived in a city before. So, and I can also say, in the interest of fairness, there are family members of mine, people that I know that live in small towns that also enjoy the city, and they wish they had the things that they have in cities in the small town, but they also feel like in this sort of smaller fishbowl, they can make a bigger difference to individual people, and they get a lot of satisfaction and warmth out of that in their lives. And I respect that. But overall, this is a topic that I do find interesting, because like I said at the beginning, the whole city-country divide is all different cultures around the world throughout history. There's always been this divide. And we talk about a lot of ideological differences that people on different political spectrums have, but we don't talk about this one that much, which is interesting to me, because to me it's the more fundamental issue. But again, I'm probably biased thinking that, because I've had both of those experiences. You know, it's ingrained into me personally, so of course I think that it's an important topic, and maybe other people don't. But anyway, I just wanted to explore that a little bit. I know probably some of you do live in small towns, and I certainly hope that what I said was not offensive. It wasn't meant to be mean-spirited. I can't repeat this enough. All of my family lives in small towns, and I love all of them dearly. I have friends from high school that I have stayed in touch with that are some of the best people I know. So this was not an indictment on small towns and people who want to live there, and people who don't prefer the city. I'm just sharing my own experience and my own opinion, and I would love to hear yours. So have at it. Thanks, guys.